Crime Files of Los Angeles podcast. A little different than most of the true crime podcasts. Here, I take a case out of the file cabinet, one that I worked on, and I review the facts of it. I look over the investigation, what went into it, how did the detectives track down the suspect. And then I go into the next phase, which is the jury trial. What evidence was presented to the jury? How was the case argued by the prosecution, by the defense? Then finally we talk about the conclusion of the case, as well as what happened to all the individuals in it, the witnesses, the victims, the attorneys maybe. So it's very different as far as an approach. We take it from the beginning to the end and all the details in between. I think you're going to find it fascinating, so hopefully you'll join us. So subscribe, and we generally have a new podcast every Friday at 3 o'clock. To make sure, if you subscribe, you'll know for certain when the next podcast comes up. See you then. Today's case involves three businessmen who decided to get into the narcotic business because they knew they could make fast money, worse, tax-free. And they developed a foolproof system in which there's no way they could get caught. So let's look at what they did and the consequences and what were the facts. Well, what's our case about today? Making fast money. Better known as the Friedman BLOOMGARDEN case. What does it involve? Well, three men doing business together. First off, it was Gary Friedman, a criminal defense attorney from New York. Then we have Howard BLOOMGARDEN, a nightclub owner from Miami. And then we have Peter KOVACH, who is a college friend of BLOOMGARDEN. So they know and they've learned that you can make a lot of money in dealing drugs, which is very true. And it's all tax-free. But you have to learn how to ship narcotics from the West Coast to the East Coast. Why is that? Well, drugs are much cheaper on the West Coast, especially in Los Angeles, and the quality is much better. But the high demand for it is back east, especially in New York. So the big question is, how do we get them there? So the two of them, Gary Friedman and Howard BLOOMGARDEN, they send their friend KOVACH to Los Angeles to set up some type of shipping the drugs from Los Angeles to New York. Now they have to decide, how do we want to ship them? Now we could send them by air, put it on an airplane. However, those dogs, the sniffing dogs, uncover so much of the narcotics that's shipped. That doesn't work. Now you can use the rail cars. It's a little slow, but there's a lot of theft on the rail cars, and that's not good. Well, what do we do? Yeah, there you go. U-Haul. Get a U-Haul van in Los Angeles and fill it full of drugs and drive it across the country to New York. Wrong. Every DEA agent knows that if they see a U-Haul truck going through the Midwest, that undoubtedly there's a 50-50 chance it's full of drugs. So they're always being stopped and checked out. But a perfect way would be to use a motorhome, an RV. That would be perfect. Nobody would suspect that that was being used to transfer drugs. All you'd have to do is take the floor out. You just rip up the floor and you can put the drugs in, and then you just lay down another floor on top of that. Not that difficult to do. Perfect. But to make it even foolproof, the thing to do is get two women to drive that RV across the country. No one would suspect that of having narcotics. So that's what they decided to do. They got an RV. In the process, they got the guys on the East Coast sent $400,000 in cash to Peter KOVACH to buy the drugs, to get all the drugs so they could put it in the RV. And he did it. He got the RV, filled it full of drugs, and it was to be driven. Now, this is in April 1993 from Los Angeles to New York. Just kind of a straight shot from one city to the other city. Perfect. But, oh, well, wait, they got all the way to Chicago. Oh, the police stopped him in Chicago? Why would that be? Well, that RV had expired registration tags. And as a result of that, that was noticed by a trooper in Illinois who pulled the RV over, and when they got to, they could smell it was full of marijuana and other drugs. So they seized all that narcotics inside the RV. That was $400,000 worth of drugs they confiscate. Now the issue becomes, who should suffer the loss? Peter KOVACH, Gary Friedman, Howard Bloomgarden. That became the big issue. Now, whose fault was it? Well, Peter KOVACH, he got the RV, bought it, and he didn't pay that much attention to the registration tags on it. And in California, there have different color tags depending on the year. And any law enforcement officer, just by looking at the tag, you know whether it's out of date or not. So that was the reason why it was spotted and pulled over. So the belief is that, hey, it was Peter KOVACH, the shipper, who was responsible for the loss, the $400,000. So even though they were all friends before, this split up the group because they were demanding Peter KOVACH, he had to pay them $400,000. Well, how are they going to do this? Well, Gary Friedman, the attorney, he has a brother, Kenneth Friedman, who had a little bit of a shady past. And so they got him to come in to help get that $400,000 from Peter KOVACH. And now let's get a little bit of an understanding who these people are. I mentioned to you that Gary Friedman was a New York defense attorney. He loved New York. He grew up in New York, and he went to law school in New York, became an attorney. Relatively prominent attorney, did a lot of criminal work, and he came in contact with a lot of drug dealers. He represented them and did very well by representing them. But in the process, he learned about how they were in business, how they made money, and how they could prevent getting caught. So Gary really had a lot of information there, and he had contact with Howard Bloomgarden on some other legal case. So they started talking about how could they set up a drug business among themselves. Now, Howard Bloomgarden, he's from Miami, as we talked about earlier. He was born and raised down there, and he went to the University of Miami, and many of you know the other name of University of Miami is the party school for spoiled rich kids, which a lot of people say is true. Now, what Howard Bloomgarden did, he majored in business administration. This is where he might learn something, but I guess you'd say his minor was dealing large amounts of cocaine to the students at the university. So he got very much into the drug business, and after he graduated, he was trying to take over nightclubs in the South Beach. And he bought this one called Club One, very, very popular, and a lot of drugs dealt in the back room there. So he got very familiar with how to deal drugs and how to sell drugs and make money from the drugs. Now, when Howard was going to school at the university, he met Peter KOVACH, and he was kind of a poor student. He needed a place to stay, so he rented the apartment with Howard Bloomgarden, and they became close friends. And Peter really admired Bloomgarden. So now let's get back to our story about they want to come out and get the money, that $400,000 from Peter KOVACH. So we have Howard and Gary who have decided that they're going to get Peter KOVACH and sit him down and say, look, you owe us this money, get it to us. So they decide to go to Los Angeles to track down Peter KOVACH because they don't know where he is. They don't know what he's doing. They've lost contact with him. Now these are the people who fly out to Los Angeles. They're Kenneth Friedman, Gary Friedman, the attorney, and this Ruben Hernandez. And they spent almost a week out there looking for him. You know, they got a car, they got guns, they got everything. They had everything ready to go. But Gary, as I say, is the attorney. He had to go back to New York. He couldn't stay out on the West Coast looking for this Peter KOVACH, so they all fly back to New York together. Now this gets a little confusing. Now the second attempt, what happens on that is they learn that he's working at what they think is maybe a cell phone store, and this time we have, now somebody new comes in. We have Kenneth Friedman and we have Ruben Hernandez, but now a Juan Galendo in place of the attorney. They all fly to Los Angeles and they start looking around. Where is this cell phone store that Peter KOVACH could be working at? And they were able, after a while, to kind of track down where he was working, and this is the cell phone store. So now they know where he's at, but now what are they going to do to force him to give him $400,000? So this becomes a big issue as to how we're going to go about pulling this kidnapping off. So they had picked up this old Buick Regal and they were using it to drive around. They had been given these guns by a person who supplied the car, the guns, and all the other things in what was called a kidnap kit. So they're ready to do it. And they found out on Hawthorne Boulevard that this was the cell phone store. So now they're driving down there and they want to check it out to see if he's in there, meaning Peter KOVACH is in there by himself. So they're driving this old Buick down there and they come through the parking lot and they come over to this other street, Barron Avenue, and somehow they hit water and the tires squealed as they pulled out, and it was right in front of a Torrance police car. So now we have these police officers wondering, what are these guys doing? They're going very fast. So the police followed, and they were very evasive, and eventually they were able to pull them over. So when they pulled them over, you know, they look at, there's the three men inside. We have Kenny Friedman, this Ruben, and Juan. And they asked him, hey, get out of the car, we want to talk to you, what you're doing here, it's late at night, and you're driving around. And they find a gun, a loaded gun under the front seat, and another loaded gun in the back seat. So now the police, they're onto something. These guys must be doing a robbery. So what are they doing with guns under their seat? So then they do a more thorough search of the car, and they find all sorts of things, duct tape, all sorts of blankets, and all sorts of latex gloves. So all of these are things that you would use in a possible robbery. So what do? The police, they arrest them, the three of them, for suspicion of robbery. Well, we know they weren't there to rob anybody. They were there to kidnap Peter KOVACH. So they got arrested for the wrong crime. So it doesn't work out. But in the process, they're booked. They're booked for suspicion of robbery, and these are their booking photos. Now they wanted to make sure they didn't want to use their real name, and this is the, they talked to the attorneys back in New York because they want to get out on bail. And here we have Kenny trying to talk to his brother back in New York, telling him that, you know, he needs $50,000 bail in order to get out, and he gives his false name. So this is what they're doing.
Yo. Yeah. Yeah. What? As long as it doesn't pop out, you'll be out in the morning. I want to get this done, dude. There's nothing to go back to. Listen, man. Call me back in a half hour, all right? Yeah. Okay, goodbye. You hear me? Yeah. All right? Yeah. H, I'll call you back. Goodbye. You hear me, H? What? I said, nothing to go back to. Yeah. Listen, let me tell you something. You got to be recruited the proper way, and then boom. Let me see if it'll be done. Call me back. All right, goodbye.
So this was a phone call that Kenny made to his brother in order to get bail raised so they could get released. And the bail was raised and they were released under those phony names. So they're out and they want to continue to do that kidnapping, but this time they wanted to be successful. So they wait around for several days. They got money from a Western Union account at this liquor store, and they had another car delivered to them, and this is the car they're using now. It's an LTD Ford, and it's supplied to them by Gus Melav, and he is from San Diego, and he comes up, drives the car up here, gives them some new guns, and gets them all ready to do the kidnapping. So on October the 26th, 1994, they decide they're going to do it again, and this time they're going to do it right. They drive over to the cell phone store. The guys go inside there with their guns, and they get Peter KOVACH. But there's another person in there who's working with Peter KOVACH. His name was Ted Gould. So they grab both of them, and they take them out and put them in that Ford LTD. And they're kind of squished in the back seat with Kenny on the one side and Ruben on the other side. So now Gus, who's the guy from San Diego, he's now driving the car, and Juan is up front. So they drive from the cell phone store over to a motel in Lawndale, and it is a motel. It's kind of a long-shaped motel, and they get a room at the far end, so far away, no one, even the managers of the motel, could not hear what was going on in their room way in the back. So they get room number 116, and this just kind of gives you a flavor. It looks like any other type motel room, but a lot of things are going to happen in this motel room, and a lot is going to happen between these two beds where the phone is. So now that gives you a picture of what's going on inside this room. Now, Kenny is demanding the $400,000 from Peter KOVACH. And he's saying, you owe this money to us, you owe it, you got to pay us. You messed up on the registration tags, and we lost all that dope was seized by the police. Now, Peter KOVACH, he doesn't have any money. He most likely doesn't even have $1,000 to his name. So they're demanding that he come up with the money. On the other hand, they say, okay, you've got friends who can raise the money for you. And he doesn't have any friends. He doesn't know people in Los Angeles who can put up money. And they don't want to release him. If they release him, of course, he's going to go to the police. So what are they going to do? They continue to demand this money from him, and if he doesn't pay, well, bad things are going to happen to him. So Peter realizes he's in trouble. So when he sees an opportunity, he runs toward the window to dive through the window. And he breaks the window. He's injured slightly by it, but the window is shattered. And now Kenny and the others realize, well, they got to get out of this room because the manager and everybody's going to know something's going on. So they get another room just down from that 116. And this time, Kenny takes Peter's head and sticks it in the toilet, where the water, and tries to prevent him from breathing. Of course, Peter is, squirming around trying to get air, and Kenny keeps telling him, look, if you don't give us $400,000, we're going to kill you. And he says, I don't have it, I don't have it. So after this, for 45 minutes, maybe up to an hour, Kenny is getting tired, and he gets on the phone to call Howard Bloomgarden back in they're in New York, and they tells him, hey, what are we going to do? The guy doesn't have the money, he's not paying us the money. And Howard says, well, you're going to have to get him to pay. Now what I raise here is the point of no return. Have they reached that point? What is interesting is, what else can he do? Kenny cannot release KOVACH and the other guy, Ted Gould, otherwise they'll go to the police. Kenny thought he had nothing else that he could do except to kill Peter KOVACH. So he gets on top of Peter KOVACH, who now has his hands with zip ties, and he's lying down between these two beds, and Kenny takes the phone and the cord and wraps it around Peter KOVACH's neck and just pulls tight as he can, and holds it there for more than a minute, almost like 5 minutes, and Peter KOVACH is strangled. He's strangled to death from that cord from the phone. And then he gets on the phone, Kenny does, to Howard and says, well, now what do we do with this other guy? You know, this Ted Gould, you know, he doesn't owe us any money, he didn't do anything to us, and he just happened to be working at the cell phone store that night. And Howard said, he's got to go. He's got to go. So that gave the green light to Kenny. He put Ted Gould down between the two beds, got that cord from the phone, wrapped it around his neck, and strangled him. So he is strangled just like Peter KOVACH was strangled. Now, the next question is, how are they going to get rid of the bodies? They've got 2 dead bodies, and, well, we have Gus Malave, and he's from San Diego. He's the one that supplied the car, and he agrees to take the bodies, put them in the trunk of that Ford LTD, and this is what he does. Puts both of them in the trunk. It's a large trunk. Both bodies fit in there without any difficulty. And then he drove it from the Torrance area, the Lawndale, to San Diego, where he lives. So that's getting rid of the bodies. And what Kenny had paid Gus $1,500 to take the bodies over into Mexico and bury them there. No one would ever find the bodies, 1, and 2, if they found the bodies, they wouldn't know who they are because there was no identification. Everything would be taken off of them. So that was perfect. So Gus got $1,500, and he was supposed to take them to Tijuana. They're most likely to be buried where, you know, in the hillsides there overlooking Tijuana. But Gus says, hey, look, I've got the money, you know, I'm back home in San Diego, let me just dump the bodies in San Diego. And that's what he does. He takes the 2 bodies that are in the trunk of that Ford LTD, he drives over to an industrial park, it's dark, very dark, and he takes the bodies out and he dumps them. Now they had kind of deteriorated because they had been in a hot trunk for 2 days. So what was interesting, the date was October 31st. That's Halloween. And just think of what it's going to be like when a security guard walks along there on Halloween and stumbles over 2 bloated dead bodies next to the trash. All right, that is kind of what's going on there. Now the next question is, how is this case solved? And everybody seems to get away with it because Kenny and the other guys that came out from New York, they flew back to New York. They're home safe back in New York. However, That first car that was used by them, in which the Torrance police officer pulled him over, the Torrance police started searching that car, and they were looking all over the car, and one of the CSI people was in the back, and they went into it was kind of a little ashtray, and when they did, they found this piece of paper, and what was a flyer for the cell phone store. So now they got a connection. The cell phone store, where they were going to do the kidnapping, and they did the kidnapping, and when they dusted it for latent prints, it came back, they had a print. There was a very clear print. When they ran it through the database, it came back to Gus Malave. It's his fingerprint on that cell phone flyer in the back of that Buick that was stopped by the Torrance police. Now they have something. So they go down to San Diego and they talk to Gus, and things start changing. Gus starts to say, well, wait, I didn't kill anybody, and Gus didn't. He was not involved in the killing. He drove the car in the kidnapping, granted, and he supplied the hitmen with the 2 cars, the guns, and the duct tape and all of that. But Gus doesn't want to fall for the murders. So what do you think happens with Gus? He starts singing like a bird. He tells them everything, and which Kenny did, because he was there and saw Kenny do it. And he talks about how Howard Bloomgard was on the phone and they were talking to him all the time, and Gary Friedman, he's able to testify to everything. So that is what happens. All 3 of them are prosecuted. Now Kenny receives the death penalty, and he is placed on death row. Gary Friedman, he gets life without the possibility of parole, and Howard Bloomgarden, likewise, same life without the possibility of parole. Now, do these 3 guys remind you of any group? What about the Sopranos? Is there a similarity between them? One is from New York and the other is from New Jersey. I understand there's a slight difference there. But these are hitmen on the East Coast who seem to have problems doing a job on the West Coast. But then when you think of it all, we talked about fast money. Fast money has a price. Here we have 2 lives of 2 people, very young people, and you say, was it worth it? You decide. Well, hopefully you found this Friedman Bloomgarden case interesting. It had a lot of twists and turns in it. I wrote a book, The Superstar Prosecutor. In that one, it was involving drugs, drug dealers, in which they shot 2 DEA agents. That's a fascinating case, a big shootout in the San Marino, California area. So if you want more information on big drug cases, get my book. Otherwise, I hope you join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles podcast. We're going to take another case, review it, and hopefully you'll learn something from that one. See you next time.